Sometimes I wonder why Solomon is considered wise, because I don't sometimes think he's very wise. Because when you are wise, how do you marry 700 women and have 300 concubines, and these women persuade you to worship other gods? I consider myself to be a Christian of Berea. These were Christians who, when he had preached, they would go back and read the scripture for themselves and question. If I had lived during the days of Christ and I was one of his disciples, I would have been Thomas or Philip. I would have told Christ after his crucifixion and resurrection, I want to see. I would have said to Christ, we have lived with you, I now want to see the Father. Doubt is the mother of faith. Christ during his life told us about the Pharisees who, when they pray for long hours that they may be praised of men. If you very carefully follow Christ, his most important messages were not delivered for more than 3 minutes. And I asked them to go and test. How long is the Lord's Prayer? How long is the Sermon on the Mount? How long is the parable of the Good Samaritan? Christ hit the point. And I suggested to them, Christ knew that human concentration can only be captured for so long. Let us, as Christians, search our souls. Search our souls, because it is important to remember that we live in very difficult days. We live in days when it is not so very easy to know which message is the right message. We live in days that are actually mentioned in the Bible. If you read the book of Matthew, at chapter 24, verse 24, Matthew says that in these days there shall arise many Christs, and they shall perform wonders, and that if it were possible, they would deceive even the very elect. We live in days where those who claim to be Christians are attracted to miracle workers. But we forget the message of Christ when he tells us that there will come a time when such as those will come to him, and they'll say to him, Christ, we performed miracles in your name. And he'll tell them, I know you not. We live in times which are spoken of in Paul's letter to Timothy, when he says that in the last days people will be lovers of themselves. There'll be a kind of godliness which is not in keeping with the message of God. But he then tells us that just as Jannes and Jambres troubled Moses in the desert, their days will be numbered. God makes worthy those whom he calls. He does not call the worthy. And when today, therefore, we talk about finishing strong, we've got to look at the Bible and ask ourselves what it is that is divinely ordained. You know, I imagine to myself when the hosts of heaven are sitting up there and they make this decision after they have created everything, and the book of Genesis says that the world was void and without form. And then they make the decision that they will create man in their own image. And Adam is created in God's own image. And the Jewish word for the soil is Adamah, from which the name Adam is then derived. And when you read the Bible, some theologians actually say that if you read the first segment of creation, he says we created them in our own image. And when you read the Talmud, it is suggested that in fact, and this is in Christian tradition almost blasphemous and heretical, that Adam's first wife was Lilith. And then it goes to the second level of creation, and it says that God saw that it was not good for Adam to be alone. And it is then that Eve is taken out of his flesh, and he says, woman, out of my flesh. They started very well. They worshiped God very well. But they did not finish well. And because they did not finish well, that is why we are suffering today. Even the heavens have never been happy because they did not finish well. God had to send his son, who was humiliated and persecuted and crucified because Adam and Eve started well but did not finish well. And if you read the story again and you meet Abraham. Abraham was a worshipper of many gods. He lived in Ur of the Chaldeans, which is modern day Iraq. And it is of him that is said in the Bible that he was God's friend. He brings him out. And to demonstrate how friendly God was to him, the story is told on the decision that was made in the heavens that Sodom and Gomorrah would be destroyed. And we are told that there is a conference and a conversation in the heaven whether that information should be revealed to Abraham or not. And the decision is made by the three angels to tell him that they are going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. And they tell him, and he asked, what about if there are 50 good people in Sodom and Gomorrah? And he says, if there are 50, we shall not destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. And he says, what about if there are 45? And we are told that if there are 45, he will not destroy. And he proceeds and says, what about if there are 20 and 10? Ultimately, Sodom and Gomorrah is destroyed. Abraham started poorly but ended well. And you can go on and on. And you look at the story of Noah and move pretty quickly and go to the story of Moses. I do not know which movies you watch, but I would commend to you to watch Cecil B. DeMille's movie made in 1956, The Ten Commandments. And there are many movies, The Ten Commandments, but these I commend, with Charlton Heston as Moses, with John Derek as Joshua, and Yul Brynner as Ramesses. And it tells you and dramatizes the story of Moses. How does Moses begin? He begins at a time when a decree has been given by the Pharaoh that all the children of Israel must be destroyed. But by divine intervention, Moses is rescued and he lives in the palace of the Pharaoh. And if you look at the dramatization, he is brought up as a child of the Pharaoh, although he is the sister's son. Then he kills a Jew according to the dramatization, and goes through the desert and lives in the house of Jethro, where he meets his wife Sephora, or Zipporah, as we sometimes say. And when you read that story in the dramatization, on the day that he meets God, he goes to the mountain of the Lord and there is a burning bush. And of course he doubts. And when he is sent out, he says that I am not of a fleeting tongue, and God tells him, you are Aaron thy brother shall speak for you. He then goes back to the Pharaoh and tells the Pharaoh, thus saith the Lord, let my people go. And they are tested. 10 miracles. And ultimately they leave. And in that dramatization, one of the most interesting things is when the Pharaoh, after the 10th miracle, the Israelites are about to cross the Red Sea, and he sends his hosts to go and attack them. And Nefertiti, who is the Pharaoh's wife, tells him to go back. And of course the story is known. When he comes back, the Egyptian hosts have been drowned. And he comes back, and Nefertiti asked him, where is Moses? And Ramesses, he says of Moses, his God is God.